If you're a lover of deep history, pay attention. If you don't have interest in knowing, keep scrolling. Now, we mostly ask why Africa is no longer great as it was in the past. You see, before looking into this question, it is very vital I bring to our notice that we are always criticized by our own people who mock us when we teach about the untold history of our African ancestors, when we teach about the past civilization and greatness of our African forefathers. These Africans believe nothing good ever came out from Africa and nothing good will ever come out. This is their belief. The fall of Africa took a long historical process. You see, to begin, we should understand that there are two types of Africans. The Africans before slave trade and the ones after slave trade. The first Africans were the first in the world to start the science of engineering, medicine, and astronomy. 10,000 years before the continent of Europe was known in history, around 833 BCE, when Homer wrote his Iliad and the Odyssey. These are the two first books of Europe. Now, why? Because a people are known by the period they started writing, and the first person to write a book in Europe was Homer in 833 BCE, which was why I say that was when Europe was known in history, because that was when they started writing. The collapse of Africa started when the black race was invaded. Always have this in mind, that the collapse of Africa started when the black race was invaded. It's not like our gods were not strong to protect us. Yes, they did. But most of the responsibility fell on the Egyptians. The collapse of Africa started when the black race was invaded. You see, the first invaders were the Hyksos from Asia around 1675 BCE. This was during the Egyptian 13th dynasty. The Hyksos ruled the African Egyptians for 108 years after plundering the civilization of the Egyptians. They ruled a part of Egypt for 108 years. The Greeks from Europe invaded in 332 BCE under Alexander and ruled for 300 years. The Romans were the second Europeans who invaded in 30 BCE and ruled for 600 years. And in December 639 AD, the Arabs entered Egypt, invaded in 640, and conquered Egypt and North Africa in general in 641 AD. Places like Tunisia, Morocco, and other countries in North Africa. North Africa was invaded and ruled by the Arab Muslims for over 700 years before European slave trade started in the mid-15th century. The various invasion of the black race by foreign invaders marked the starting point for the collapse of African civilization. This is what I want you to get. The various invasion of Africa by Europeans, by foreigners, led to the collapse of Africa. That is number one. The invaders, they plundered, they distorted, and they plagiarized the knowledge and history of our African people. Now, the second stage, that is number two, of the fall of Africa was the period of imperialism. Imperialism is the economic and political control of the resources of poor and backward countries by a developed rich country. This period started with slave trade, where able-bodied African young men and women were exploited as slaves. The result of this was that it presented to the world a degrading image of Africans, which we are suffering today under racism. Africans were humiliated and used as slaves to build the plantations and industries in America and Europe. The other stages of imperialism after slave trade were colonialism and neo-colonialism. Here, African leaders are used by their former colonial masters to exploit and underdevelop Africa. What about the economy of Africa? How they plundered and underdeveloped Africa economically. You see, to understand how the African economy became poor and backward, one must look into the crisis of capitalism in Europe. Let's dive into economics. Now, the capitalist economy in Europe was the system that encouraged exploitation, inequality, and the ownership of private property, which is capital. Now, This capital is used to enslave and exploit the working class in Europe. This was also the cause of class struggle. Now, in Europe, those who own no property had only their labor power. These are the working class. The European peasants, who are propertyless, were paid little only for food in order to come back and work. The owners of private property were called the bourgeoisie. This is a wealthy class who controlled the means of production. You see, in the year 1848, in his Communist Manifesto, the German philosopher, that is the German thinker Karl Marx, penned down a prophecy of an inevitable violent social revolution that will bring down the capitalist system of exploitation in Europe. Karl Marx said that the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. That is, a revolution was boiling in Europe. A violent socio-political revolution was about taking over Europe. Now, the proletariats, that is the propertyless class, the peasants, the laborers, the working class, they were so exploited by the bourgeoisies to the point where they see their labor, their production capabilities as different from themselves. They hated what they produce because they have become slaves to their production. The exploitation of the working class was so bad that they started to hate what they produced. The working class was so exhausted, and revolution was the final blow. You see, to avert the boiling revolution, European politicians through colonialism exploited the African economy in order to improve the working conditions of the proletariats in Europe. This was how they managed to stop the violent socio-political revolution that was about to engulf Europe. The thing is that African resources were cheaply bought and sometimes forcefully taken from Africans and sold back to Africans in an exorbitant price. The outcome of this was that Africans became primary producers, while the Europeans became secondary producers. We still cannot refine our own resources. Rather, we appreciate imported finished products. Africa is in dilemma.